Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching India's World with me, Frank Razan Pereira. Sri Lanka's president accused newly reappointed Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe of corrupt leadership in a scathing speech on Sunday in which he voiced doubts about their ability to work together and signalled the two-month political crisis is far from resolved. President Maithripala Sirisena administered the oath that returned Wickremesinghe to office, then gave a speech soon after the ceremony telling the Prime Minister and a group of his lawmakers that he can't find people of honesty and integrity to help him take the country forward. The swearing-in took place privately with only a few lawmakers in attendance and media not permitted. It initially indicated an end to the impasse, but Sirisena's speech is a sign of more acrimony, possibly leading to early parliamentary elections. A new cabinet is expected to be sworn in soon. Now, Wickremesinghe spoke separately at his official residence and refrained from responding to Sirisena. On this edition of India's World, we will look at the political situation in Sri Lanka. Joining me on the program today are Professor S.D. Muni, Foreign Affairs expert, K.P. Fabian, former ambassador, and K.V. Prasad, Associate Editor of the Tribune. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. How would you look back at the developments that took place in Sri Lanka over the last 2 months?
Well, I would put it this way. It was 50 days or 51 days of constitutional nightmare. Imagine in a democracy having two individuals claiming to be prime ministers. One, of course, legitimate, as I see it. The other, who was appointed arbitrarily by the president, who, in my view, trampled on the constitution. And, it was a very serious crisis. And there was also a financial crisis because they had to pass the voter accounts, So it was serious, and one was not expecting this from Sri Lanka. I have served there, and one was not expecting this. Sri Lankans are very politically savvy. They know how to talk to each other. They can find a compromise, even when it looks very, intractable. But this was a surprise, and I personally consider that Sirisena, the president, has not sort of handled the matter as he should have, and he mishandled it.
Right.
Of course, Rajapakse's ambition also is there, but between the two of them, they have mishandled the matter.
And as things stand right now, where does it leave the both of them, Sirisena and Rajapakse?
Well, they are weakened, obviously, but at the same time, Rajapakse has indicated, and he need not have said it, we all know it, he is going to sort of boost up the nationalist sentiments. This government has the support of the TNA, Tamil National Alliance, and that therefore it will damage Sri Lanka, the Sinhala nationhood. And then also he will say that there was pressure from foreign powers. Many of the ambassadors did not recognize the newly appointed quote-unquote prime minister. They didn't call on him, and things like that. And then the other day, they were transferring a CID official, Silva, and this official was investigating certain atrocities which took place when Rajapakse was president, including murder of a journalist and things like that, abduction, torture and all that. Now they transferred him from CID to something else, but today that order has been withdrawn. So a lot of, unconscionable things have been happening there, and I am personally very relieved that this has happened so far. But this doesn't mean that, from tomorrow onwards, everything will be peaceful and calm. But I think it is good that the coup carried out by this duo, that is Rajapakse and Sirisena, has failed for the time being.
Okay. Failed for the time being is how you're putting it. Professor Muni, how would you look back at the developments of last week? Because there were a lot of things that happened, starting first with the Supreme Court's verdict.
Well, there are so many things, and I think I'll go a little farther than the last week. I'll tell you a few things have come out very strongly. One, the institutional strength of some of the democratic institutions in Sri Lanka, judiciary for instance. They have stood up, and besides judiciary also parliament, that you had 3 votes, and every time they said very clearly that the anti-constitution moves of the president were not acceptable to them. So there are parliamentarians who have stood up. They were Sirisena and Rajapakse tried their best to break them. They would not. They tried to break UNP. UNP has not broken. Even some of the rivals and competing candidates like Karu Jayasuriya and Sajit Premadasa, they were being won away by the opposition. The opposition did not succeed. So I think some of the best things have also come out. Some of the worst things have also come out, because in the process of parliamentarian debate, pepper spray was used, all kind of abusive languages were used, almost violence of some type came up, which shows the other side of the political process or political dynamics. So in a way, many things have come out. But
were you surprised at all, Professor, that the violence did not spread to the streets, barring that one incident where Arjuna Ranatunga's security personnel fired at someone?
No, that was also for a different reason. It was not. No, it's good that it did not. That's why I say the institutions have stood up. And in the country as a whole, there wasn't a major law and order chaos, which it could have happened. So these are on the positive side, but I said negatively also some of the stakeholders, and particularly, I'm sorry to say, as Ambassador has already said, President Sirisena, I mean, he went on violating. You know, at one stage he said, I will not reappoint Ranil Wickremesinghe even if I have to quit. And look what has happened yesterday. Rajapakse, I mean, went to every extent to see that he got the vote. Once, twice, thrice they tried. Eventually he resigned because he thought he could not win over these people. So the stakes in power and ambitions in power have also unfolded in a rather, you know, unsavory manner, if not ugly, if you want to put it this way. And this is a moment where the president stands in a huge embarrassment, I would say. I mean, the guy who he claimed loudly and so many times that I will not reappoint him, I want to sack him, he is the corrupt one, he had to reappoint him, despite the speech which he is giving. So the speech now, if you want to project it into future, I am not still very happy that the Sri Lankan crisis is finally over. It is not. It is over in the constitutional sense, that the institutions would start functioning it. But I don't think Sirisena would like to see, for whatever remaining period of months which are left, would like to see Ranil succeed.
Okay.
And
we'll talk about that probably ahead in the program in our next segment as to, you know, what's likely to happen in the future as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. Early elections, the way forward, that's something we'll discuss. But before that, KV Prasad, is this the most logical end to the problem at hand in Sri Lanka over the last 2 months, do you think?
Well, one final victory point is that the constitution and its legality was maintained by this highest court of the land, which means future presidents will be more cautious of invoking such an act. I mean, of course, there's always a possibility you can amend the constitution and so on and so forth, but given the current crisis, that the Supreme Court upheld the validity of the constitution and said so, making Mr. Sirisena go back on his words and rather make him eat his humble pie and do what he had to do constitutionally. So to that extent, it gets reflected in that. But having said that, the political uncertainty will continue to remain, because the animosity that was exhibited right from the time of his act of dismissing Prime Minister till the speech yesterday clearly shows that the partisanship remains deeply entrenched. So with that being the condition, will the elections be early, or you wait for the presidential elections coming up towards the end of next year and then leading to the national elections? So these are all issues. Certainly it's not going to be easy for either team to continue to work the way they did.
All right. All right. Ambassador, since both guests have touched upon this particular aspect of the issue, I want to know your thoughts really. So what is the solution to the problem at hand? Early elections the solution, or what is it? I mean, can Sirisena and Wickremesinghe somehow put their differences aside and work together? Do you see that happening? What's likely to happen?
Well, I would love to see them working together, but I'm not sure whether that will happen. And I'm afraid there will be further sort of, obstacles on the road of this government, and there may have to be, you may have to have an early election. But the country will suffer, you know, and that is very serious because the economy is not doing well. The government should attend to that rather than play these games, you know, the politicians, I mean. So it is serious.
And what is going to be on top of the agenda as far as Wickremesinghe is concerned now that he has been reappointed the Prime Minister?
Well, he will sort of try to maximize, assert his authority as Prime Minister, you know. Perhaps he might even overstep. But that is to be expected. And he has to attend to the economic mess first.
Right.
Yeah, because the debt is high. And generally speaking, the economy, the prices are going up, the economy is not doing well. That is what he should attend to. But whether he would have time to attend to that, I don't know.
All right. And what about corruption? You know, because Sirisena has time and again, you know, accused Wickremesinghe and his government of corruption. Do you believe that corruption is a big problem in Sri Lanka?
There is corruption, but I do not know whether Sirisena has not been exaggerating. And even, you know, he said about some foreign intelligence trying to assassinate him. We haven't seen any evidence. Which foreign intelligence might be interested in assassinating him? I can't think of any. So, you know, Sirisena has been sort of saying things which are not necessarily true.
All right. Professor, the ambassador suggesting that corruption, of course, is a problem as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, and that's something that needs to be addressed. There are various other issues as well in Sri Lanka that probably are on top of the agenda as far as Wickremesinghe is concerned. But, you know, you, of course, started talking about how it's going to be difficult going forward for Wickremesinghe and Sirisena as well. What's likely to happen?
Well, the corruption is an issue in all the Asian politics, not only Asian, almost everywhere. And then Sirisena is talking about corruption again and again because of the big bank scam issue which is stuck on Wickremesinghe. So he is probably hitting at Wickremesinghe directly or indirectly. But is Rajapakse not corrupt? There are so many corrupt cases on the family which are still pending, and President Sirisena has not taken a decision. So it's more of a political planking, political rhetorics which is going on. It doesn't mean that the issues are not there, that the corruption is not there. Yes, it is very much there. Now, so far as future is concerned, there are a couple of things which are very clear. First, to my mind, I don't see a real stability. Ranil, your question was, Ranil would want to perform and show that he has done something in order to consolidate his constituency for the coming elections. But I don't know to what extent President would cooperate with him. Why I am saying that? Because Rajapakse has openly declared that he will ally with Sirisena for the next elections. Now, if you are allying with Sirisena, then the battle lines are being drawn. And I think in the coming few months, these battle lines would be further deepened and consolidated, meaning thereby a rivalry, at least the undercurrent of rivalry would be very much there between the President and the Prime Minister. And what happens to the administration and the developmental projects remains to be seen in that. Secondly, the election could have taken place if you go to referendum and all that. But now you cannot hold early elections, at least not before 4.5 years, because constitutionally that is not valid. President cannot dissolve it without any reason. And I have a feeling that the parliamentary elections which took place, I think after presidential election, will take place after presidential election. And everybody, Rajapakse, Ranil Wickremesinghe, even Sirisena, they'll try their luck as to what happens, what equations they are going to work upon. But in the election, I mean, it is a grossly exaggerated fact on the part of Rajapakse and others that since they won the local elections, they have an upper hand. To my mind, the equations have changed completely, because the local elections were won on the basis of failure of the Sirisena, Ranil Wickremesinghe combined. Now Sirisena has gone to Rajapakse's side. Therefore, the part of the failure is a liability for Rajapakse or whatever else it is. And secondly, in the coming elections, whenever it takes place, the major issue would be the violation of the constitution and attack on democracy. Therefore, the old issues of local issues of governance and all that would be very much there, but quite subordinated and subjugated. A new set of elections are there. And thirdly, new equations are being formed, because the new coalitions are, I don't know where the JVP would stand, where the TNA would, I don't have time to go into the details or possibilities, but the new equations would come up, project new coalitions, and how they contest with each other would be a very interesting phase of Sri Lankan politics.
A new phase in Sri Lankan politics, can you call it that?
Well, until the elections at least.
Okay, all right. KV Prasad, till the elections, till the time, you have a president and a prime minister who can work with each other, are the people of the country really going to be the biggest sufferers? Because, it's going to be a game of one-upmanship till that really happens.
Well, of
between
course,
the two.
Eventually the citizens have to, the matters of governance, if they take a back seat, people, it's bound to affect, the trickle-down effect will be on the people. As it seems working together is more of a compulsion, but it's not going to happen. I mean, there's no clear indication anything other than that, because the speech yesterday made it, even though Mr. Wickremesinghe was more accommodative, or was, when he said that he's going to, things will be okay, stuff like that, he sounded more conciliatory because he got his job back. And obviously he needs to get it done. And he has to make a point and prove that he can govern and disprove some of the charges that they were trying to be sticking on to him. So these are the issues. But as it is, the people have been suffering. As Ambassador Fabian also pointed out, the last 51 days, there was hardly any issues of governance that were taken, and the economy is really on a downslide. So that's going to hit everybody. And I remember way back in early 90s, one of the biggest statements that ever stuck when Bill Clinton said it is the economics, stupid. So it eventually boils down to economics. If bread and butter issues start bothering people, there is going to be. So I think that is something which putting governance on track will be the biggest challenge for Mr. Wickremesinghe. And how, when he has a president who's not so helpful, at least he has sounded not being helpful. So I think that is going to be a challenge for him and his party at this point of time.
Absolutely. And Ambassador, let's not forget that India is the closest neighbor as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. What does it mean? What does all this mean for India?
Well, let us take note of the fact that India was very cautious in its pronouncements. When the crisis was on, India said, well, we hope that all parties concerned will respect the constitution and settle matters amicably. So India was very cautious. Now, as far as India is concerned, we have to recognize that Rajapaksa had been taking a line which was anti-India. He was siding with China a bit too closely. We all know about Hambantota and whatnot. And even in the present case, they were trying to buy members of parliament, and enormous amounts were promised. I read somewhere it was almost $1 million. It's a lot of money in Sri Lankan currency, even otherwise. So we don't know who had, provided all this money, So I think for India, that the crisis has been resolved, at least for the time being, in this manner. It's a good thing. And as regards Ranil, we can expect him to follow a policy. Well, obviously Sri Lanka's own interests first, but subject to that, he will be keen on having good relations with India.
Right. Professor, that having been said, the ambassador pointed out how India showed restraint, really didn't involve itself with everything that was happening in Sri Lanka. But should we be concerned about China's ambitions in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think India showed restraint, but let me be very frank as an academic analysis. Our sympathies were not with Rajapaksa. And our sympathies were not with the moves which Sirisena had made. So we continuously, openly, publicly underlined that democratic processes, constitutional processes should be honored, should be stuck to. We were very clear, and in all equations, I think we find Ranil regime more acceptable than the way Rajapaksa and Sirisena would have done. But we have kept our channels of communication open with all of them. including with Rajapaksa when Subramaniam Swamy called him. He had a long one-to-one meeting with Prime Minister Modi, and that is a prudent diplomacy, I would say, because you should not shut your doors on anybody, and particularly in the neighborhood, they have their own diplomatic politics. So we will try and keep our relations as normal as possible with all the stakeholders in Sri Lanka, and would like to see that a regime comes up which is sympathetic and sensitive to India's concerns and anxieties. And to that extent, I hope that our sympathies would remain with Ranil Wickremesinghe and the coalition which comes up. Now, China is quite well entrenched, and I think despite the earlier feeling of new regime of Sirisena being sympathetic to India, did not work out to the extent. They renegotiated some of the agreements which have really tied them much more. 99 years lease, the Chinese are going to stay there, and the Chinese have invested a lot. They are not going to withdraw very easily. Therefore, we must gear our diplomacy to dealing with the Chinese presence in Sri Lanka, and I would say not only Sri Lanka, in all the neighborhood. So we need a bigger policy rather than a Sri Lanka-China policy or a Maldives-China policy. We need a China policy, whether it is neighborhood or the whole of the Asian region. And I don't see very clear contours of that policy still emerging. I hope the government is trying. Let us see. Wish them well.
All right, KV Prasad, what's the best way forward really as far as India is concerned with regards to Sri Lanka?
See, our participation remains to the extent we can, because it's not, it's simply incomparable to in China. We just cannot match the kind of resources a $12 trillion economy brings as compared to ours. Plus, India's own record of developing projects and delivering on time has always been, a matter of criticism, concern. We commit a lot. Sometimes we're unable to, for various reasons. Some could be local factors, some could be our own resources, and so on and so forth. That having been said, I think the larger issue remains is how do we keep our presence intact, so that while China's presence is known all over, it's nothing new. I mean, whether it's the entire neighborhood, you have the Chinese presence. And I said China is growing in its... But Indian approach has been capacity building, which is slightly different from the Chinese model that everybody talks about. So I think to that extent, our goodwill generation changes to that extent. Whatever little possible, quiet diplomacy and quiet work is going to bring you where you are. But I don't see matching China for resource by resource, because simply we don't have that kind of capacity in terms of resources.
All right, closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Ambassador. Do we need to see some new faces as far as Sri Lanka's politics is concerned, because we've seen the same folk, keep doing the rounds?
No, I have the feeling that those 3 or 4 or 5 who are dominant, they will continue to be there for some more time to come. But as far as India is concerned, if I may say so,
yes,
while we cannot match China in terms of hard currency or even engineering, their ability to execute, but we have the advantage of soft power. Sri Lankans don't go to China for shopping. At least they were not going when I was there. They used to come to Chennai. So I think we have the soft power, and that can certainly, up to a point, sort of compensate for our imbalance vis-a-vis China in terms of money and, ability to execute.
All right.
But even the ability to execute, we should improve upon it, because whatever we sign, we should be able to deliver.
All right.
And that is something which can be done. It's not impossible.
Yes. Focus on our strengths is what the ambassador is suggesting. Professor, is that enough?
Well, I think we have to do much more in dealing with China, so far as China is concerned. Secondly, we have a knack of alienating neighbors. Partly, we have a disadvantage because of identity and others. And we must make sure that we don't alienate, because China builds on that alienation. I mean, I have always had this hypothesis that 50% of the Chinese influence in the neighborhood is largely because we have surrendered something somewhere, and that is by alienating neighbors. So I think what we need to do is to be very careful about their sensitivities, about their own interests, and how we deal with them, how we conduct ourselves with them. And I think that is very necessary, besides delivering projects on time or besides trying to get into the areas which would strengthen them. I think a personal psychological approach, a politically sensitive approach is very necessary.
All right. KV Prasad, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Just to carry forward what Ambassador Fabian said, and the fact that India has this Buddhist circuit, and if you remember very recently the Prime Minister went for the Vaishak festival. The whole idea was to what he was mentioning of soft power. And this is a very big connect because a large Buddhist country with Buddhist followers and India being the birthplace of Buddhism. So there's a natural connect that India can and has been doing. Probably is the level at which it probably you can step it up to the extent. As I said, we do it quite diplomatically and play to your strength, of course.
All right, but increased people-to-people contact is what you're suggesting, and that's the best way forward, really. All right, on that note, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. You can share your feedback and your suggestions with us. Our email ID is indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.